Man, what a week. I leave you guys for a few days. Next thing I know, I come back. Marshall sold to some Chinese company for $1 billion. What the hell's going on? I can't leave you guys for a minute. Let's discuss. Welcome back to Addicted to Gear. Today we're diving into some massive news that just broke in the guitar world. Now, if you've been living under a rock the last couple of weeks, you probably haven't heard yet. Everyone else in the world probably already knows this, but Marshall, one of the most legendary amplifier brands in history, has been sold to a Chinese company for $1 billion, or is it euros? Anyway, it's a shitload of money, guys. That's the most important part of this story. That's right, Marshall, the name behind some of the most iconic tones in rock history, the brand we all know and love, I got one right here, is no longer a fully British owned company. Now, let's be honest, it hasn't really been fully British owned in a while since the last acquisition, but this next acquisition could be a huge shift for guitar players like you and me. So let's talk about what this all means, what we know so far, and whether or not we should be concerned about the future of Marshall amplifiers. I'm not going to say I know all the ins and outs about this deal, but this is what I've heard so far. The company is called Hongshan Capital Group, actually, and it's a Chinese private equity firm, and they bought the majority stake in the Marshall Group in a deal worth over $1 billion. The Marshall family still owns about a 20% stake in the company, which is a minority stake right now, but control of the company is now in new hands. So this isn't completely out of nowhere. Marshall's been evolving as a brand for a while, since about 2010, I think it was. I made a video on this way back when they partnered with Zound Industries to expand into new markets. At the time, they were looking at Bluetooth speakers and lifestyle products, and that partnership eventually led to a merger in 2023, forming what we know as the Marshall Group that has just been sold. With this new acquisition, Marshall is now officially owned by this investment firm, and this investment firm does have deep ties with the Chinese market. I think they're also involved in TikTok. So naturally, guitar players like you and me probably have a lot of questions on our minds right now. So one of my biggest concerns is whether this will affect the quality of the Marshall amplifiers, especially their British-made, hand-wired series that so many players love. Now, these are considered to be like the cream of the crop still today because they're, lovingly made one at a time, hand-wired, and they're not necessarily as mass-produced as some of the other models that they have. Will Marshall's UK production stay the same? Right now, it's pretty unclear. The company still operates out of Bletchley, England, and they do say that they want to preserve Marshall's legacy. We all know how these things go, right? Over time, manufacturing shifts to cheaper labor markets, possibly China, Indonesia, or elsewhere, and they start making, cost-cutting decisions, which ultimately affects the quality of the product. Now, Marshall's been pushing hard into these consumer electronics area here. Will Marshall double down? Maybe we don't need to focus on amplifiers that much anymore. I'm taking a step back from all of this business side of things that we're talking about here today and thinking about something a little deeper here. Why do we as guitarists form such strong identities with our gear? I don't think this is necessarily the case in other areas. If you look at sports players and stuff like that, if you're a baseball player and you use a specific brand of bat, is that your identity? Not really. You're just using that as a tool. So how often do you hear somebody say, like, I'm a Strat guy, or I'm a Les Paul guy. I identify as a Marshall guy. I've said it myself many times that I feel like I'm a Marshall guy. That's the tone that I like. That's the tone that I like to hear when I play music. It's not just about the model or the specs. It's about who we are as musicians. The gear we choose becomes an extension of our personality and our playing styles over time. So Strat players tend to love the versatility of that particular instrument, the glassy tones, the beautiful, playing blues licks on a Strat. Nothing can beat that. Les Paul players love that thick, meaty sound. of a beautiful Les Paul piping through a Marshall or something like that, you know. And if you're a Marshall guy, you love that powerful, punchy British crunch, the sound of rock and roll itself. You know, this is why I gravitated to that Marshall sound when I was younger. So now that Marshall's been sold to this foreign investment firm, does that change the way you identify with this brand now? You know, some players are already saying, well, if Marshall isn't British anymore, then it's really not Marshall. You know, they identify the Marshall brand with being made in Britain. Others might not care as long as the tone stays the same. If I can still get that juicy Marshall sound, I don't care where it's made. What happens if quality control starts slipping? You know, if the heart and soul of the brand shifts away from guitar amplifiers and more towards Bluetooth speakers or other gizmos, mass market audio gear, stuff like that, what does that mean? Where does that leave us? Will being a Marshall guy mean the same to you in 5 years from now as it, you know, as it means today? That's the real question. It's a little concerning, I gotta say. So basically, Marshall's always been more than a brand. For me, it's always been a symbol of rock and roll. You know, it's been there since the early foundations of rock. I associate Marshall with Jimi Hendrix, Eric Clapton, Slash, Zakk Wylde, you know, Eddie Van Halen, Jimmy Page, the list goes on and on. And this is where it gets a little bit worrying for me. I've seen this before with other legendary brands as well. You know, we could look at brands like Gibson, for example, when they were struggling financially just recently, they shifted their focus to lifestyle products too, instead of their core guitar lineup. And I think they made a mistake. I think they realized that they made a mistake and they eventually came back and refocused themselves. And I think they're doing a lot better now. But will this acquisition mean that Marshall will make the same mistakes? I hope not. Will this mean that we're going to be seeing higher prices down the road, maybe less innovation for a while? I hope not. The company says it plans to honor Marshall's legacy, but let's be honest, when a private equity firm buys a brand, it's never about keeping things the same. They're in this to make as much money as possible, to squeeze that Marshall lemon. If you've been eyeing a British-made Marshall amplifier out there, guys, for a while, maybe you've been holding back because they're just a little bit too expensive, now might be a good time to grab one before they make any major changes and people start to realize that, you know, they have to hang on to the old ones. And we see the prices go through the roof. We've seen that a couple of times already. So we need to watch closely to see if Marshall tube amps start getting outsourced. If we see a big shift in manufacturing, that could mean the beginning of the end for Marshall as we know it. I hope that doesn't happen. Keep our fingers crossed. On the flip side, this can also lead to more affordable Marshall products if they expand production, but will they still have that classic Marshall tone? That's the big question. So I want to know what you think. So let's talk. Does this change how you feel about Marshall? If you consider yourself a Marshall guy, does this news make you rethink that now? Would you still buy a new Marshall amplifier if it's no longer being made in the UK? And do you think this could actually be good for Marshall? Or is this the beginning of the end for the brand? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let's get a discussion going. And if you've enjoyed the video so far, hit that little like button, subscribe, and of course, join us for our live Sunday stream every Sunday morning right here on Addicted to Gear. Turn your notifications on so you don't miss any future gear talk that's going to be coming your way. And thanks for watching Addicted to Gear, guys. I really do appreciate you guys tuning in. I'll catch you guys on the next one. In the meantime, go plug into your Marshall and rock that thing. Talk to you soon.